The alien throne world of Zareth stood like a fortress in the vastness of space. Its towering spires pierced the sky, and the grand palace shimmered in gold and silver, reflecting the power of an ancient, technologically advanced civilization. In the heart of this empire, Prince Valfarn, heir to the Zareth throne, sat upon his massive throne, surrounded by his courtiers. His gaze was cold and unbothered as he scanned the pathetic figure standing before him. Reyna Cole, the last surviving human soldier, stood shackled in the middle of the throne room, her eyes burning with defiance. Her once pristine uniform was torn and covered in grime from the long journey, but her spirit remained unbroken. The alien court was filled with laughter as they mocked her, a single human standing before them, unable to do anything but wait for her execution. The Zareth nobles looked on, some whispering among themselves, others openly sneering at the frail creature who dared challenge their supremacy. Prince Valfarn raised an eyebrow as he gazed down at Reyna, amusement flickering across his face. "Look at this one," he said, his voice like ice. "A pathetic creature, a relic of a species doomed to extinction. You humans are weak. Your empire has fallen, your cities turned to rubble. And yet you still think you can stand against us." The nobles erupted into laughter, their voices ringing through the massive hall. Reyna didn't flinch. She stood tall, even as her body screamed in pain from the brutal captivity. Her mind, however, was sharp. She had faced death before, and she would do so again. She locked eyes with Valfarn, her voice steady, but laced with contempt. "You'll regret underestimating us," she said, her words cutting through the laughter. "Humans don't give up. We never have. And we never will." For a moment, the room fell silent. Valfarn leaned forward, intrigued by the strange confidence in her words. "You think you can stop the Zareth Empire?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You? The last of your kind." Reyna's lips curled into a small smile. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." In the shadows, hidden from the alien eyes, Ikiko, Reyna's eye implant, was quietly working. The device, once a simple neural enhancer, had become far more. It was now a tool of rebellion, a silent weapon against the Zareth. As Reyna stood before her captors, her mind was not on the humiliating spectacle. Instead, it was focused on the mission at hand. Ichijo was mapping out the palace's defenses, analyzing weak points, and preparing for what would come next. It wasn't just her survival on the line. It was the future of humanity. As the nobles continued to mock and jeer, Reyna's expression remained calm. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to show fear. Instead, she let the tension build. Prince Valfarn looked at her one last time before raising his hand to signal the guards. "Take her away. We'll deal with her later." But as the guards moved forward, Reyna's heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had done her part. The first step of the plan was in motion, and soon the Zareth Empire would regret their decision to laugh at humanity. With a final look toward the prince, Reyna was dragged away. But deep within her, she knew the battle had just begun. The first shot had been fired, not with weapons, but with words. The Zareth had underestimated humans, and that would be their downfall. As she was led down the corridor, a small flicker of hope ignited in her chest. The fight for humanity's future was far from over. The war had already begun, and Earth was burning. The skies, once blue and full of life, were now filled with dark clouds and smoke from the constant barrage of alien bombardments. The Zareth Empire had come with overwhelming force, their massive warships hanging like vultures over every major city. The last resistance, the human forces that had fought so hard to hold their ground, were now scattered, outmatched, and outgunned. In the final days of Earth's fight, Captain Reyna Cole led a small group of soldiers on one of the most dangerous missions of all: the destruction of a high-value alien facility deep within the heart of their empire. If they succeeded, it would give humanity a fleeting chance at survival. If they failed, It would mean the end of everything. Reyna stood over the smoldering remains of a once thriving city. She watched as the last few survivors fled to underground shelters, the distant hum of alien ships reverberating in the air. The human resistance was outnumbered, but they were still fierce. She had seen it in every soldier's face, the same fire that had driven humanity from the beginning of their existence. Even now, as cities crumbled and the alien forces grew stronger, humanity refused to surrender. The mission had been clear: infiltrate the alien base and plant an EMP bomb that would disable their weapon systems, even if just for a moment. That would give the humans a chance to regroup and fight back. But getting to the base was not going to be easy. The aliens had set up nearly impenetrable defenses, and their robotic soldiers patrolled every corner. Reyna's team, a group of hardened soldiers, moved swiftly through the ruins of the city, their steps silent as they approached the facility. Their faces were set with determination, their eyes filled with the knowledge that this might be the last time they ever saw the light of day. Among them was Miles, Reyna's closest friend, who had been by her side through every battle. They shared unspoken understanding, a bond that had been forged in the fires of war. As they neared the base, the sounds of distant explosions echoed through the streets. Reyna's hand tightened around the grip of her weapon. They were getting closer, but so was the danger. Alien soldiers, heavily armored and armed with advanced weaponry, patrolled the area. Reyna signaled for the team to halt. She studied the movements of the enemies carefully, timing their patrols. Then, with one swift motion, she gave the command. Her team moved like shadows, taking out the alien guards with surgical precision. There was no room for error. Each step they took could be their last. They reached the entrance of the facility and planted the EMP bomb. But as they were about to make their escape, they were spotted. The alien forces flooded in, overwhelming them. It became a fight for survival as the EMP timer counted down. Reyna and her team fought with everything they had, but the odds were against them. In the chaos, Miles made a desperate decision. Seeing the aliens closing in, he stayed behind to cover the team's escape. "Go," he shouted, as blasts from alien weapons lit up the night sky. "Finish the mission. I'll hold them off." Reyna hesitated, but there was no time. With a final, heartbreaking glance at her friend, she turned and led the rest of the team to safety. The explosion from the EMP rang out behind them, signaling that their mission had succeeded. But the cost had been high. They had lost good soldiers, and Miles was gone. Reyna didn't have time to mourn. The war wasn't over, not yet. As she and her team retreated into the darkness, she knew the fight was far from finished. Humanity had taken a blow, but it wasn't defeated. There was still hope, still a chance to turn the tide. Reyna, despite the weight of their losses, couldn't let go of that hope. It was the last thing they had left. As the humans regrouped and prepared for the next phase of the war, Reyna made a silent vow. No matter the cost, she would make sure their sacrifices were not in vain. The battle for Earth, and for humanity's future, was far from over. The grand throne room of the Zareth Palace was filled with the sound of cruel laughter, echoing off the marble walls. Prince Valfarn, heir to the mighty Zareth Empire, sat at the center of the massive hall, surrounded by his court. His eyes glinted with amusement as he looked down at Reyna Cole, the last surviving human soldier. She stood before him, shackled and bruised, but there was no sign of fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a quiet defiance, an unspoken promise that she would never give in. "You must be quite desperate to face us," Valfarn said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Humans, weak and insignificant, thinking they can stand against the might of the Zareth Empire. Look at you. This is the best your species has to offer." The nobles in the room laughed, their voices ringing with scorn. They were used to seeing humans cower, broken by the overwhelming power of the Zareth. But Reyna stood tall, her posture unyielding. She had seen worse than this. Far worse. The aliens could laugh all they wanted, but they couldn't break her. "You're wrong," Reyna said, her voice calm but filled with certainty. "You underestimate us. You think we're weak because we don't have your technology, your power. But that's where you're mistaken. You've never faced a species like ours." Valtharn's amusement faded, replaced by a look of cold disdain. "What makes you think you can defeat us? Your planet is already in ruins. Your people are nothing but a dying breed. You've already lost." Reyna's gaze didn't waver. She knew the situation was dire, but the belief in humanity's strength still burned within her. "We may be beaten, but we're not broken. We fight because it's in our nature. You'll never understand that. You think power comes from technology, from weapons. But you're wrong. It comes from our will to survive." As Reyna spoke, she could feel the presence of Ikijio, her AI implant, working in the background. Ikijio had been silent for the moment, but it was constantly analyzing and learning, searching for weaknesses, calculating the best way to bring down the Zareth Empire. The prince and his court had no idea what they were dealing with. The nobles continued to laugh at Reyna, their amusement growing at her defiant words. They saw her as nothing more than a dying, desperate soldier clinging to false hope. But Reyna knew better. She had seen the human spirit in action. She had seen her fellow soldiers fight and die, with no regard for their own lives, because they believed in something bigger than themselves. They believed in their world, in their people, in their future. That belief was what made them dangerous. Valtharn stood up, his voice laced with mockery. "You think you can win. You really believe you stand a chance against us. We've crushed your kind before. We'll do it again. Your planet is in ashes, your armies shattered, and now we have you. This is the end for your species." Reyna's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from a rising sense of purpose. She had heard it all before, from the alien leaders who thought humanity was nothing more than a fleeting, insignificant species. But she knew the truth. The Zareth had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the resilience of humanity. "You can take our world," Reyna said, her voice steady. "You can destroy our cities, kill our people, but you'll never break our spirit. We'll come back, and when we do, you'll regret underestimating us." The prince stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a wave of his hand, he motioned for the guards to take her away. "Enough of this. Your words mean nothing." As Reyna was dragged from the throne room, she didn't look back. She knew that her time here was only the beginning. The Zareth might have thought they had won, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The seeds of rebellion had already been planted, and they would grow into a force that the Zareth could never defeat. Reyna smiled to herself as she was led away, knowing that the fight for humanity's future was far from over. The enemy may have had the upper hand for now, but Reyna had no doubt that one day humanity would rise again. The cold, metallic walls of the Zareth prison seemed to close in around Reyna as she was thrown into her cell. Her body ached from the brutal handling, but her mind was sharp. She had been captured, humiliated, but she wasn't beaten. Not yet. There was still a glimmer of hope, something that kept her going, even in this dark, alien prison. The door slammed shut behind her with a loud clang, and the sound echoed in the cold, empty space. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering, pale light that cast long shadows across the stone floor. The walls were lined with strange symbols and alien technology, none of which she understood. The air smelled of metal and antiseptic, and there was a low hum in the background, like a machine was constantly running. It was a prison designed to break you, both physically and mentally. But Reyna refused to give in. She had faced worse. She had fought against impossible odds before, and she had survived. She wouldn't let this be the end. For a moment, she allowed herself to rest against the wall, her mind racing. She needed to focus. She had to find a way out of this. Ikkyo, the AI implant that had been her constant companion throughout the war, was still active, hidden deep inside her neural network. She reached out mentally, connecting with it. Ishijo, she whispered. I need a way out. A brief pause, then Ishijo's calm, mechanical voice replied inside her mind. Working. Attempting to access external systems. Please hold. Reina closed her eyes, waiting. Her body was battered, but her resolve was unshakable. She could feel the heartbeat of the prison around her. Its every system, its weaknesses. Ishijo was searching for an opening, a way to bypass the prison's defenses. It was taking time, but Reina knew better than to expect an instant solution. She had learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment. Suddenly, a faint buzzing sound broke the silence. Reina's heart skipped a beat. The door to her cell had just unlocked. Without wasting a second, she shot to her feet, her pulse quickening. It was happening. Ichijo had found a way. She moved quickly and quietly toward the door, feeling the cool metal of the walls as she passed. The door creaked open just enough for Reina to slip through. She didn't hesitate. Stepping out into the dark corridor, she crouched low, staying in the shadows, her instincts kicking in. Every sense was heightened as she moved through the alien facility. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the distance, alien guards patrolling, unaware of the escape happening right under their noses. Reina didn't have much time. She had to move fast. The facility was massive, and she knew that if she didn't find a way to blend in or hide, she'd be caught. She pressed herself against the wall, moving silently like a ghost. Ichijo guided her every step, offering tactical advice, pointing out security cameras and patrol patterns. Reina's training kicked in, and she began to weave through the hallways, keeping to the shadows, always a step ahead of the guards. The adrenaline was pumping through her veins now, every moment filled with urgency. Her breath was steady, but her mind was racing. She had to get to the docking bay. That was her only chance. There were ships there, Zareth ships, but they were her ticket out. If she could steal one, she could get back to the human fleet. If she could survive long enough to do that, then there was still hope for humanity. As she rounded a corner, she saw the exit to the docking bay in the distance. It was guarded heavily. 2 Zareth soldiers stood in front of the entrance, their weapons raised. Reina's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't panic. She knew what she had to do. Drawing on every ounce of training, she pulled out the small blaster hidden in her boot. With a quick, silent move, she took aim and fired, hitting one of the guards in the shoulder. The other turned in alarm, but Reina was already on him. She dove forward, knocking him to the ground before he could react. A swift punch to the face, and he was out cold. Reina didn't pause. She grabbed a keycard from one of the guards and swiped it at the entrance. The door hissed open, and she slipped inside, her eyes scanning the rows of alien ships. There was no time to waste. She ran toward the nearest vessel, climbing into the cockpit. The ship's systems lit up as she quickly began to hack into the controls, her fingers flying over the buttons. Come on, she muttered, her heart racing. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the craft began to lift off the ground. Just as she was about to take off, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Reina didn't look back. She punched the throttle, and the ship shot forward, blasting through the hangar doors. As she broke free from the planet's atmosphere, Reina allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had made it, but there was no time to celebrate. She had a long journey ahead, back to the human fleet. The fight for humanity's survival was far from over. The sound of the rebellion echoed across the stars as Reina led the charge. It had been weeks since her daring escape from the Zareth prison, and in that time, she had managed to rally the scattered remnants of humanity. The once broken and scattered human forces had found a renewed purpose, a rallying point in Reina's survival, and the critical information she brought back with her. The war was far from over, but hope had been reignited. And with hope came action. The Zareth Empire, confident in their overwhelming power, had underestimated humanity's will to survive. Their grand fleet, once invincible, was now facing a series of relentless strikes. Humanity had adapted, learned, and fought back. Each skirmish, each battle brought a new victory, however small. The empire that had once looked untouchable was beginning to show cracks, and those cracks were growing wider with every passing day. Reyna, now leading the coalition of human and allied alien forces, coordinated their attacks with precision. The plan was simple but bold. Hit the Zareth where they were weakest, at the core of their power. The human resistance had managed to infiltrate the Empire's communication networks, finding cracks in their once impenetrable systems. The first strikes had been small, guerrilla-style attacks, but now the time had come for something bigger. They would strike at the heart of the Zareth Empire, and they would make it crumble. The first major target was Zareth Prime, the homeworld of the Zareth species and the seat of their power. Reyna had always known that this day would come. The humans, despite their technological disadvantage, had the one thing the Zareth didn't: unity. The human spirit, driven by the belief that they could rebuild and fight for a better future, had become a force that no alien technology could crush. The battle for Zareth Prime was like nothing humanity had ever faced before. The human fleet, though smaller, had been reinforced by rebels from other alien species that had suffered under the Zareth's rule. The alliance had formed out of desperation, but now it was a united front. Ships of every size and shape, from human-made to alien vessels, filled the void of space above Zareth Prime. The Empire had never seen anything like it. Reyna stood in the command center of the lead ship, her eyes focused on the screen. The enemy fleet was massive, but they had one advantage: speed and strategy. The humans had learned from their past mistakes, adapting and developing new tactics. They were no longer fighting as individuals. They were a unified force, a collective of nations and people who had one goal: to end the tyranny of the Zareth. The first wave of attacks hit their target with devastating precision. A barrage of missiles and energy blasts rained down on the Empire's defensive stations. The massive fleet of Zareth ships scrambled to respond, but the human forces were too quick. Reyna's ship, moving at an incredible speed, darted through the chaos of the battle, leading a strike team that took out key communications relays and power generators. The Zareth fleet was beginning to fall apart. But the real shock came when Reyna and her team infiltrated the heart of the enemy's capital. Inside the heavily guarded palace, Reyna and her crew fought their way through endless waves of robotic guards and elite soldiers. Every room they entered, every hallway they passed, brought them closer to their ultimate goal: the throne room of Emperor Valfarn. When they finally reached the heart of the palace, the battle reached its peak. Valfarn himself stood at the center of the throne room, his cold eyes filled with disbelief. He had never expected this. His empire, his legacy, was crumbling before his eyes. The humans, the weak species he had laughed at, were here, standing in the place he had thought would always belong to him. Reyna stood before the Emperor, her weapon in hand. The final moment had arrived. She had lost so much to get here: friends, comrades, innocent lives. But this was it. The end of the Zareth Empire, the end of their reign of terror. With a sharp motion, she raised her weapon. Valfarn didn't move. He was still in shock, unable to comprehend the enormity of his failure. "I told you," Reyna said, her voice cold and firm. "We fight because it's in our nature, and we never give up." In one swift motion, she ended the reign of the Zareth. But even in that moment, Reyna knew the work wasn't over. The Empire had been defeated, but there would be those who would rise to take its place. Still, humanity had shown that even against the greatest odds, it could rise and fight. The stars now belonged to those who were willing to fight for their future. As Reyna and her crew made their way out of the palace, the cries of victory filled the air. The battle was won, but the war for humanity's survival had just begun. The Empire had fallen, but there was still much to be done. Reyna didn't hesitate. She knew that the fight for freedom, for the future, would continue, because that's what humanity did. They never gave up. The battle for Zareth Prime was over. The Zareth Empire had crumbled, their once imposing fleet scattered and broken. The humans, against all odds, had triumphed. The final moments of the fight had been a blur. Fire, explosions, and the overwhelming sense that they were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future. Reyna stood at the helm of the human flagship, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars that had once seemed distant, cold, and unreachable now felt like a new beginning. The war had taken its toll. Countless lives had been lost, and entire worlds had been ravaged. But the victory had brought something far greater: hope. The future was theirs to shape. The remnants of the Zareth Empire were in chaos. Their leaders were dead, their military shattered, and their once proud civilization was in disarray. But even in the face of such destruction, Reyna knew that the fight for peace was just beginning. The humans had done the impossible, but they couldn't stop now. The galaxy was vast, and there were many other threats: alien factions, warlords, and factions that had their own agendas. The battle for freedom was never truly over. Humanity, once the underdog, now stood at the precipice of a new era. The alliance of human and alien forces, forged in the fires of war, was stronger than ever. Reyna had become more than just a soldier. She was a symbol of humanity's strength and resilience. Her story, the story of the small, unassuming human species that had been underestimated, had inspired millions. And now those same millions were ready to rebuild, to forge new alliances, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. The first steps towards rebuilding began almost immediately. Reyna and her crew worked alongside leaders from all over the galaxy, both human and alien, to help restore order to the shattered worlds. The surviving human fleets were now tasked with providing aid to the planets that had been left in ruins by the Zareth. People worked together, forging new relationships and setting aside old grudges. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As Reyna stood on the surface of a reclaimed human colony, looking out over the landscape, she saw children playing, families rebuilding their homes, and people working together toward a common goal. The scars of war were still visible: burned buildings, ruined cities, but the signs of life were unmistakable. Humanity was rebuilding, not just physically but spiritually. The unity forged in battle had transformed them into a force that would now focus on peace, cooperation, and growth. Reyna knew that the challenges were far from over. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be new dangers, new threats. But she also knew that humanity had proven something important: that they could fight, not just for survival, but for a better future. They could rise from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever before. As the sun began to set over the colony, Reyna thought back to all the friends and comrades she had lost. Their faces were etched into her memory, their sacrifices never to be forgotten. She had promised them that their deaths would not be in vain. She had kept that promise. The victory was theirs, but it was also for everyone who had fought and died along the way. Reyna felt a deep sense of peace, a knowing that the work they had done was only the beginning. The galaxy was not theirs to conquer, it was theirs to protect. It was theirs to shape, to build a future where all species, human and alien alike, could live in peace. As she looked to the horizon, Reyna felt a deep sense of purpose. The war had ended, but the real journey was just beginning. A new chapter for humanity, and for all the free peoples of the galaxy, was waiting to be written. And Reyna, along with the countless others who had stood by her side, would ensure that it was a story of hope, resilience, and unity. The stars now belonged to those who dared to fight for a better tomorrow, and Reyna knew with certainty that humanity would never stop fighting for that future.